Thank you for coming to my seminar on essential oils. No, so we are, why not? Why not plug it now? So I am talking, the whole blame the media, it's the media's fault. I'm not the actual embodiment of the media, but I am the people who talk about the media. So as part of the Department of Communication Media Studies, I realized that communication as a discipline is probably one that we don't have a really great sense of what we do. And I thought this is a good time to plug kind of what we do to make sense of the bigger picture. So if you were to take a class in public relations, which is my specialty, you would talk about things like Hong Kong and LeBron James. If you were to have interest in, let's say, social media, you might talk about #delete Facebook and all the implications of Mark Zuckerberg having conversations with some people. Who knows who those people are? Or if you want to get really fancy, you might be talking about not climate change, not burning California, but why it's a big deal that Ellen and George W. Bush are having a nice chat at a sports game, right? Things probably detracting away from the normal conversation of what we do. So what we do as a discipline, what communication scholars do on a big picture level, is focus on things like you probably have heard at some point in your life. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. You've probably heard an adage like that at some point in your life. For me, it is both of those things. My life is basically grounded in both those ideas. So when somebody says something, it is both the tone, the pitch, the volume, but it's also the actual context that grounds it. It's the subject matter. We know socially there's a difference between I hate you and I hate you, right? We picked it up. You got that. Diamond immediately smiled when I said that. So we know that there are differences in the way that people communicate, and because we know that there are differences in the way that people communicate face to face, we also have to recognize that with the advent of technology, with things like the internet, we ask questions like, why does it matter when President Trump says something for the 171st time? What are the implications of the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and even something like the how? What is really sort of demoralizing for me is that we're not as familiar. I think a third of the room raised their hand for the California fire things. The entire state is literally engulfed in flames. But I would bet more people know who that face is. Shout out to Logan Paul. So, don't worry, I'm coming back to Logan Paul. We'll get back there. We'll get there. So, an actual undergraduate research team here on campus are currently investigating YouTube apology videos. And the reason we're investigating YouTube apology videos, which, by the way, come find me in Goldspawn 27, the reason why we're investigating YouTube apology videos is that one of the big implications of media and unpacking media is actually taking a couple steps back and realizing that there are some serious ramifications as to what people say, when they say it, how they say it, and of course, for our purposes as communication scholars, what are the implications of this on a global, international level? So if we talk about LeBron James in Hong Kong, if we talk about Trump and literally anywhere, there are a lot of situations where we can look at the information and think about something like the power of the internet, or as we talk about it, things like deplatforming. So one of the most common new age phenomena that exists is that we as socially active people tweeting constantly are becoming more and more enamored by what we call #cancel culture. Show of hands, cancel culture, anyone familiar with cancel culture? Okay. So the idea behind cancel culture is that we, as these social advocates of change, we want to be able to dictate who has access to platforms like social media, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And a good example of cancel culture, if you're not familiar with it, comes in the form of Roseanne and her show getting knocked off the air as a result of something that she tweeted. Who would have thought? All your high school teachers were saying, be careful what you put on the internet. This is the Roseanne story. So when we talk about deplatforming, what we're really saying is that there is a behavior, there's an action that warrants criticism. We typically have a reaction. Sometimes we have a reaction from our friends and our family, from the people that are around us, from our co-hosts of a show. Sometimes we have a reaction to the reaction. Like if you're Roseanne in this situation when you're tweeting really racially inappropriate things, you say things like, wow, unreal, which, by the way, decent response. But we think of other people saying things like, then quit. So if we look at something like deplatforming, of removing somebody's Facebook account, their access to Twitter, their access to YouTube, we can think about the serious implications of that on a larger scale. And in this case of someone like Roseanne, her show gets canned. And that's not great for Roseanne, but here we are. So when we talk about cancel culture, when we talk about deplatforming, what I really want us to focus on more clearly, we're going all in on this, I know. Visceral reactions. Logan Paul, everyone was super happy. Alex Jones, not the same. Okay, so there is a sort of fork in the road in the way that we understand cancel culture and the way that we understand deplatforming. And that is, some people look at deplatforming as a viable option of we should cancel somebody like Alex Jones, a conspiracy theorist who said that Sandy Hook was a conspiracy. I don't know how many people, and we don't need to show hands, don't out yourself. I don't know how many people would disagree with the decision to deplatform, to remove somebody like Alex Jones from the internet. However, there is some form of criticism wherein deplatforming works, and then potentially deplatforming won't work. And so when we think about this phenomena, this activism of deplatforming, one of the key ingredients in all of this is figuring out, when we talk about deplatforming, who and what can we deplatform? And my role oftentimes in talking about the ethics of it is not necessarily who and what, but should we? And that, in a lot of ways, is a lot more complicated. So let's start with use case number one. Who and what can we deplatform? People. People's easy. I'm a person. You can deplatform me. It's easy. It's clear cut. I am restricted on the things that you can post on the internet. So if we look at specific examples of deplatforming, let's bring back Alex Jones. Let's talk about Milo Yiannopoulos, two household names that I'm sure over dinner you love to talk about. Or not, you shouldn't, by the way. That's one of the things that we talk about when deplatforming somebody like Alex Jones is that we have very clear and distinct terms of service. We as users, the thing that you always scroll by and you click the accept button and you just go on your merry way, the thing that you never read on all the platforms that you sign up for with your email and your password, like lovekitties22, right? All of that stuff has an associated terms of service. And when you violate that terms of service, it's easy to make a case as to why you should be removed from the platform. So if you are spreading hateful messages, sometimes misleading messages, sometimes deceitful, maybe we call it bullshit messages, there is this implication that because of the merit of your actions, we should remove you from the ability to broadcast that vitriol to the rest of the universe. So if we look at Facebook in particular, Facebook has what I view as to be the most clearly laid out terms of service. We see very compelling bullet points that clearly lay out what things are a no-go. Terrorist activity, things like organized hate, and you might be thinking by the second bullet point, this for a political science conversation. The second one is kind of subjective, and we'll get to the subjectivity in a second. But we have very clear-cut rules, and if you violate those rules, you're done. It's very simple with parenting. Don't do this thing. You did this thing. I will remove that. I have a 2-year-old son. That is my life every single day. Please don't touch that. That's a stove. I can't articulate. Don't touch a stove. And we're gone. Okay, and we're done. The benefit of having a small child is you just pick. Can't do that with Alex Jones. It's heftier. Haven't tried. Maybe I have better lower body strength. Okay, so Facebook's terms of service make it very clear. You violate the rules, you're gone. Black and white, very little room for sort of objective questioning of that process, of that protocol. But if we think about examples of deplatforming with people, again, we're still talking about people, we'll get to ideas. When we're talking about people, we have a call, we have this rallying call from a lot of people to want to deplatform individuals for poor conduct. Not conduct that violates the rules and regulations, but conduct that's just not socially great. For instance, Tom Segura, comedian, multiple Netflix specials, used the R word in one of his recent specials. A Change.org petition with over 1 million signatures called for the CEO of Netflix to take down the special. Didn't violate the terms of service of any of the platforms, especially that of Netflix. People were very unhappy. People wanted him to be removed from the platform. Spoilers, he was not. Let's talk about Aziz. Sexual misconduct, right at the wave of the Me Too movement. People weren't particularly pleased with Aziz. He has you're going to see a recurring theme, he has a special on Netflix. People didn't want his special to be played on Netflix. Spoilers, still. Okay, you get the theme, right? We're picking up on this. It's still there. Or we could talk about Dave Chappelle. As you can tell, I love comedy. We talk about Dave Chappelle, whose stand-up is also on Netflix, who referenced the victims of Michael Jackson and said in response, in reflection, that he doesn't think that Michael Jackson actually did it. Okay? Not great, but none of these cancellations, none of these deplatforming attempts that we have tried socially were actually effective. There were no violations, which makes us think maybe there's something more to this process, and it has to do with this important flow chart that I spent a lot of time developing. Okay? Start on the left and work your way across. Did you break the rules? If no, you get to stay. So when we think about the Wild West of the internet, we have very clear-cut rules of what is right and what is wrong. Forget the ethical dilemmas, but how do we make sense of that? So when we think about the people, it's really complicated because there's a lot of subjectivity to it. But when we think about the ideas, it gets so much worse. Oh, it gets so much worse. Can I just, third time, it gets so much worse. And let me give you an example of how much worse it gets. So when we think about the people, we have Trump. He is a human. He has ideas. Debatable. We'll go with that. He is a person with ideas. We don't know if they're good ideas. We don't know if they're his ideas. It's fine. When we think about things like, let's say, vaccinations. We don't have like a vaccination setup at the end here. You're not forced to do it. When we think about things like vaccinations, major platforms have been trying to develop algorithms to figure out how to combat anti-vaccine messaging. In other words, people, large conglomerates of groups, especially mom groups, are particularly weary of vaccinations. They, going back to the 90s with a debunked Wakefield study, reference things like vaccines cause autism, which we know is not true, which we actually know on a very large linguistic rhetorical level has a lot to do with our animosity toward a different type of community of people with special needs. That's another topic for another time. You can come talk to me about that. But here's the thing with vaccines. We have spent a lot, not we, I'm not involved in any way. Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter have spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to figure out how to combat these ideas. As a matter of fact, when we think about something like YouTube, because of their terms and conditions, because of their policies, what happens is that none of the content that's being posted is in violation of what their rules and regulations are. But look at something like, let's say, violent events, promoting dangerous remedies or cures, homeopathic, natural remedies for things that are alternatives to vaccines. Why would you want all of those vaccines pumped into your poor little child's body? And so when we design an algorithm that catches a word like vaccination or vax or vaccines, there are inevitably workarounds for these groups to avoid deplatforming. When Mark Zuckerberg sees somebody promoting anti-vax language, he catches vaccines, he throws it away, and here is how, linguistically, as a communication scholar, groups like this get around the actual language of vaccines.
I'm Bob Sears. I'm a pediatrician. I guess my greatest passion is just to help encourage full, complete, informed consent for vaccinations.
I'm also Marissa. By trade, I am a designer. I am also an activist and a mother.
I'm Melissa Floyd, and I would consider myself an informed consent advocate. I just want to make sure this conversation can be open for people and continue to inform people and to listen to everyone, understand why we each come to our opinion on this.
So no longer is it anti-vaccine messaging. Now it is informed consent. Because, by the way, your 18-month-old cannot provide consent to the vaccinations. Therefore, we have found the workaround. No longer are we catching vaccine in the algorithm because now I am an advocate for informed consent. And by the way, that is not accidental. When we think about informed consent, what happens when I clicked this YouTube video? Thank you, Wikipedia, the bane of college professors everywhere. But for the sake of this conversation, the actual stopgap in terms of helping us find vaccine-related content, and probably more importantly, the message that I would like for you to rebrand to combat the algorithms in general is not to say anti-vaccine. I like plague enthusiast. Next time you combat somebody who talks about vaccines are bad for you, you say, hi, Michael Blight. Nice to meet you, fellow plague enthusiast. Anyway, so when we talk about people, when we talk about ideas, the last thing, and this is the meta way of thinking, is how do we deplatform the platforms? And you may be familiar with a platform that came into light with the sigh of yes, we know, a platform called 8chan, which was used by a lot of people who were associated with the mass shootings that happened in places like Dayton. We know now that since 8chan has been taken down, it's come back with a different name. We know, perhaps more importantly, that there are alternatives to this platform. So we have tried our best to restrict the platforms that people use to meet friends who want to also shoot up a school or shoot up a movie theater, and we have tried to deplatform the platform. And that isn't particularly useful, but what you might find particularly useful is that this actually is something that has been talked about in the media. Platforms and algorithms by Trump, and actually if you go on the actual website of something like the FBI, you will see very clear evidence that points to us figuring out how to deplatform platforms as pertaining to computer algorithms. So when I show all of this, and I talk about how do we deplatform people, how do we deplatform ideas, how do we deplatform platforms, which is a really hard sentence to get out, but I did it. I'm proud of myself. Really, what we look at are things like how do we go about getting rid of all of these platforms, and what are the ethical considerations that exist? Are there inherent ethical quandaries that have to do with when we identify people on these platforms, are we actually sorting them into an algorithm, into a database that they can never escape from? What if we get it wrong? What if our robots, our AI, our computer learning gets it wrong, and I am forever identified within a database as somebody who is a potential shooter for a school? Now, what I want you to think about as major takeaways, okay? Big picture takeaways. I worked really hard on this last slide. Thought one has a lot to do with it's really, really hard to deplatform things like platforms and ideas, but it's actually in some ways easier to deplatform people. And the second and probably the most important part of this is that we, despite being these really important activists who want to do things, and political scientists hate this next comment, despite all this energy and enthusiasm, we actually are basically wiping our hands clean from any responsibility when it comes to deplatforming, which makes it really, really hard for us to be innocent bystanders. So what you can do, if nothing else, is go on Twitter, go to your settings, deplatform for yourself, and if that doesn't work, I'm kind of out of ideas at this point. Thank you.